Hi, my name is Ben Abbott. I'm a professor of ecology at Brigham Young University, and I'm really excited to talk to you today about one of the most important and beautiful ecosystems on the planet, Great Salt Lake. I'm going to be talking about the lake's past, present, and future. So many people assume because Great Salt Lake is salty that it's a very unique an exotic ecosystem. It turns out that about 20% of the Earth's surface is internally draining, meaning that the rivers don't flow toward the ocean. They flow toward saline lakes. These areas are called endorheic, terminal, or closed. Those are all synonyms for the same thing. It means that they don't flow toward the ocean. Now, don't worry, you probably don't need to know that terminology. I just wanted to make sure that you understood the reason why these lakes are salty is because that fresh water that's flowing from the mountains through streams and rivers, it actually contains a tiny amount of salt. And through time, that salt accumulates in the lake. Because the water evaporates out, the salt is left behind. And this is a picture of the largest saline lake in the world, the Caspian Sea. And I think it's kind of helpful to learn about the hydrology of these systems. So it's actually a pretty simple hydrological equation. And if I put that up here, this is the only equation of the presentation, so don't use sweat. The amount of water in the lake depends on the river flow to the lake, the precipitation falling directly into the lake, minus the evaporation from the lake. So evaporation is the only way that water gets out of the lake. Now there's a really interesting connection here where the evaporation actually is a major source of precipitation and river flow in the watershed, right? So the water that evaporates from the Caspian Sea here, some of it falls out as snow in the mountains. So it's not a zero-sum situation, and we should never seek to reduce the evaporation from these lakes. We've learned that that can cause some major problems. Just to reiterate that these are not weird, abnormal ecosystem types, half of global lake water occurs in these saline lakes. So really, really important ecosystem types. And they're especially important because these lakes occur only in pretty dry regions, right? If there was enough water, then the lakes would fill up and cut a channel to go to the ocean. So they only are occurring in arid and semi-arid regions where they are islands of water in vast seas of land. That makes them really, really important habitat types. So let's zoom in on the Great Salt Lake. I love this image taken from the International Space Station because you can see the entire watershed of the lake. A couple of reservoirs up here, Utah Lake, the Jordan River flowing in here, Bear Lake flowing into Wyoming and Idaho and then into the north part of the lake. This is the largest tributary. The Jordan River is the second largest, and then the Weber River flowing into the lake here. And so this is an opportunity to see the entire watershed. That's the whole area contributing water flow to the lake. If we were to go back 18,000 years, this is what we would have seen. A much larger inland sea called Lake Bonneville. And it's important to remember Great Salt Lake as we know it is actually quite young geologically. It's only been around for around 12,000 years. And to put that into perspective, people have been around for at least 20,000 years, right? Indigenous peoples of this region have been telling Western science and anthropology for a really long time that we were underestimating how long they had been here, and indeed, they were telling the truth. We should have believed them from the beginning. We now have evidence that these people have been here since at least 20,000 years ago. Here are some of the language groups of the sovereign nations in the current area of Utah. And we see that there's a real confluence of these different groups right around Great Salt Lake. The lake has immense spiritual and cultural importance to all of these groups, right? We've been taught that for the Shoshone, the lake is the origin story of humanity itself, right? The mother lake, our sacred lake, another term. And so what's interesting here is we know that for 20,000 years, we have a history of positive human-nature interaction. This isn't a story of incompatibility between human presence and a healthy, vibrant lake. We need to learn a new way and return to cultural ways of living that ensure human flourishing and a healthy lake. Let's talk about some of the unique characteristics of Great Salt Lake. This picture by Marianne Karin captures one of the important dynamics, an eared grebe about to feast on a brine fly. There are between 10 and 12 million birds that come through the Great Salt Lake system every year. Almost 340 species, some of the largest congregations of these individual species that occur anywhere on the planet. They depend on the lake. And they're coming to the lake not because of its delicious salty water. They're coming here because of the food that it produces. Great Salt Lake is one of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. If we look square foot by square foot, it's basically a tropical rainforest, the amount of productivity that's coming from there. You have around 9,000 brine fly larvae per square foot on some of these microbialites, these living reefs that exist in the lake. If you just take the weight of the brine shrimp during the peak season, it's the same weight as 1.3 million people. Think about that for a minute. Almost 2 trillion of these shrimp that are out there in the lake. This incredible abundance depends on the primary productivity of the lake. The algae that are growing in the water and then on these microbialites on the lake bed are fueling this amazing productivity. The lake is also very important economically to our region. This is a slide from the Great Salt Lake Commissioner, Brian Steed, and he points out what all of these products have in common is they all have a little bit of Great Salt Lake in them. Great Salt Lake is the only source of magnesium in the entire country. That's harvested from the salt in the lake. And magnesium is needed for all different aluminum and titanium and other metal alloys that go into everything from pop cans to jet fighters, right? Absolutely essential to these different technologies. Now, fewer people know the brine shrimp that are harvested from the lake support roughly half of the table shrimp that's grown internationally. So half of the world's shrimp supply depends on Great Salt Lake. Likewise, the potash that's harvested from the lake, from the salts in the lake, supports much of the nut and stone fruit crop in California and other regions in the U.S. So Great Salt Lake is actually supporting national industry and our global food supply. Now, Great Salt Lake is also very important to our local hydrological cycle. This is a picture downwind of Utah Lake, part of the Great Salt Lake system. And the reason why all of the destination ski resorts occur where they are is that the lake affects snow, so the evaporation from the lake is increasing the amount of downwind precipitation. Another reason why we need to respect and restore this ecosystem rather than try to make it into something new. Well, things haven't been going well for Great Salt Lake. This is a time series that started in the 1980s and goes through 2022 when the lake reached its all-time low in recorded history. And if we just look at the stats, the lake has lost 60% of its surface area, almost 2/3 of its surface area. 3/4 of its water is gone. And it's facing collapse within 5 years if we continue on this path. That's even with the large water years that we had in 2023 and 2024. We are right on the edge, right? And 2022 showed us how close we are. The brine flies couldn't reproduce. The brine shrimp couldn't be healthy. And we were in a situation where the lake wasn't years away from collapse. It was months away from collapse. And this lake is so important, we can never afford to get there again. One of the things, the negative impacts of losing the lake that we've learned about is dust from the lake bed. This is what the snowpack should look like. In 2022, here's what it looked like. So I don't know how well you can see all of this dust that's deposited on the snow. It caused the snowpack to melt out 18 days earlier than it would have without that dust deposition. Just an absolute crisis. Now that dust also pollutes our air. This is a picture that was taken during a dust storm coming off of Great Salt Lake versus a clean air day in the Salt Lake Valley. So when I think deeply about this, it's actually about more than the lake's biodiversity, economic value, even the public health. This for me is a reflection of our values. How are we going to care for our home? What does this say about who we are as a people, right? As the inheritors, both native and non-native, of 20,000 years of sustainable lake management, are we going to be the community that gets it, that destroys the lake? For me, the answer has to be no. So let's look at what is causing the collapse. If we look out into the watershed, why has the lake declined so rapidly? The number one driver is human water use. We are using more water than the lake can sustain. About 80% of that water use is agricultural. I'm grouping in most of that reservoir loss there. About 10% is mineral extraction and 10% is cities. So it's a pretty simple pie, 80-10-10, that we should be thinking about. If we want to get to a place where the lake begins to recover, we need to conserve around 1 million acre-feet of water. An acre-foot is 1 foot of water spread out over 1 acre. It's a huge amount. It's about 1/3 of 1 million gallons. So whenever you hear anybody talking in terms of gallons, you can almost be sure that they're not talking about a meaningful amount of water, right? We use a much larger unit, an acre-foot of water, that will that when we're talking about turning this around. That translates into reducing our consumptive water use by 1/3 to 1/2. Just want to pause for a second, because those are big numbers. We are talking about a fundamental change in our relationship with water. This isn't taking shorter showers. This is thinking about what food are we growing here. How much water are we appropriating, taking for ourselves, versus how much are we leaving for nature, our home, that ultimately is the basis for our survival. So this is a crisis that is caused by the overuse of water. Now it is absolutely being exacerbated by climate change. As things get hotter, the rate of evaporation increases and it becomes harder to maintain the lake level. But right now, I love this picture from the Heber Valley in the Great Salt Lake watershed showing all these different kinds of agriculture, right? Growing of hay and alfalfa to feed livestock, a canal that's moving water away from the river system, and then sprinklers that are spreading that water out. So we're mainly talking about livestock here. 2/3 of the water consumption, the agricultural water consumption, is going toward alfalfa and hay, which is being used to raise livestock. So this is not an issue of agriculture versus the lake. And in fact, if we want agriculture to continue, we absolutely have to bring our water consumption into a sustainable range. And we're not there right now. This is a picture of the Bear River Delta, the largest tributary to the lake in 2022, where there was no flow. It's a picture taken by EcoFlight. So this is the worst case scenario. If we look through time, the lake is 15 feet lower today than it would be naturally without the diversions that we've taken from the lake's rivers. This is an analysis that just recently came out, estimating that this red line, which is where the lake level would be, firmly in the healthy zone. The lake would be doing great if not for those water diversions. Well, why is the lake 15 feet lower than it would have been? It's got to be population growth, right? This is a very common assumption. It's also completely wrong. If we look at the amount of water that we're consuming, this is the black line up here. It's around 2.2 million acre feet a year. It has not shown a statistically significant increase since the 1990s. In the 1990s, the state's population was half of what it is today. So this isn't that there are too many people. This is an issue of too much irrigated acreage. And this is a pattern that we've seen around the world. And in fact, let's zoom back out and ask what has worked elsewhere. Because when you're in a crisis, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You want to learn from other people. Unfortunately, what we've learned around the world is a bunch of things that don't work. And there are these time series of images of lakes disappearing on every continent except for Antarctica. Lake Urmia, very similar to Great Salt Lake in its climate and its size. In that case, they blamed the weather. They said, you know what? It's just a drought. It's a dry period. Nothing we can do. Well, the lake is gone. In the case of the Aral Sea, the largest of these saline lakes that we have lost so far, they decided rather than reducing human water use, they were going to re-engineer the lake. Let's cut it in half with some dikes. We'll build pipelines to bring water in. All of these efforts failed. And we have time series like this that show through time these lakes in decline. Some of them completely going down to 0% of their former area, others on their way there. Now, I also want to point out an interesting factor in these time series. These lakes naturally do go up and down, and you're going to certainly hear people say, look, the lake is going to do what it's going to do, right? Nothing that we can affect there. That is not the case. There's a difference between the ups and downs of weather variability and a long-term decline in the lake level. And what we're seeing with Great Salt Lake and these other lakes globally is that long-term decline. We have lost 60% of global saline lake area. This is another, let me give you my serious face and think about that for a second. We're not talking about the future collapse of these lakes. Most of the lake area is already gone at a global scale. It's really, really serious. And many of these lakes have already experienced, an 88 to 100% loss. And what we see is this pattern of absolute cultural, economic, and ecological devastation when these lakes are lost. We see clusters of diseases caused by the pollution from the lake bed. Here's a satellite image from Mar Chiquita, Great Salt Lake's sister lake in Argentina, where many of the birds that breed here go in our wintertime. 600 miles of this plume of dust that's being deposited on the agricultural fields that are causing the decline of the lake. So much salty dust is being deposited on those fields that they're losing their fertility. So again, this is not a question or a fight between agriculture and the health of our lake. We have to save the lake so that agriculture, urban areas, suburban areas, commercial activity are viable and possible moving into the future. And all we have to do is look at the Aral Sea, the biggest example of what can happen, right? Whole cities, whole regions having to be abandoned. As the regional climate changed once the lake was gone, it wasn't that source of humidity and precipitation, and these dust storms began. So the stakes are really high, and so far nobody has cracked the code. Of the 120 large saline lakes that exist around the world, over 100 of them are in decline, and none of them, there is not a single example of a large saline lake being restored after it slips into decline. So we're talking about high stakes and very, very tall odds. And this is why we need everyone to be focused on this issue. We need everyone to be doing all they can all the time, to talk to their neighbors about the importance of conserving water, to be creating new ideas, to be building cultural awareness, cultural connection with the lake. So let's do a quick assessment of where we are. The current political response has some real highlights. It also has some lowlights. I deeply appreciate Governor Cox's leadership on this issue. And it's easy to slip into a place of cynicism and say, our leaders just don't care. They're not serious about this. Governor Cox, this is a quote from early 2023, he took real ownership of this issue, and has shown real leadership, right? The legislature has created a new position. We now have a Great Salt Lake czar, Brian Steed. He's the Great Salt Lake commissioner. He's the quarterback who's been charged with coordinating the state's efforts to rescue the lake. There's a large multi-million-dollar study, the Basin Integrated Plan, that's going on right now to help understand what's going on with the lake system. There are 4 major programs that are going on. There's agricultural optimization. This is figuring out how to help farmers use less water to grow their crops. There is a water banking pilot that's going on where we're giving more flexibility to water users that they can move their water around. There are changes to urban water use. Secondary water metering is going on. Incentives for cities to have less outdoor irrigated landscaping. And the Watershed Enhancement Trust, which is bringing together all kinds of different water rights, including a donation from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and many smaller water holders to get permanent water rights to Great Salt Lake and also temporary leased water rights to the lake. These are really encouraging programs. They also are not going to get us there on their own. So one of the big changes that's happened is we had 2 huge water years. This is a picture that took at the end of May last year, showing just how much snow there was. This has really changed the political dialogue, including the governor's office. And a lot of people have taken their eye off of the ball. There's this sense of, wow, the lake has come up several feet and we're really in good shape. If we look at the reality, we are just a couple or at most a few years away from where we were in 2022, where the food web was on the brink of collapse. And we need to be focused on how we can grow the flow of water to Great Salt Lake by 1 million acre-feet as fast as we can. Now, there are some bad ideas out there. And oftentimes, if we have a shortage of water, the first thing that we think about is, how can we bring in more water? Right? Maybe we could cut down a bunch of trees, and then the trees aren't going to use as much water. We could build a pipeline from the ocean. We could build more dams to store more water. We could shoot pollution up into the air to try to squeeze more water out of the clouds, even though scientifically this has not been shown to make a big difference. We could change the lakes upstream of Great Salt Lake, make them smaller, less surface area, let more water flow to the lake. These are risky, expensive, non-viable ideas. There is a proven recipe we've learned globally that can lead to water security. First of all, understand water. Figure out how much is sustainably available. Number 2, conserve the heck out of the water. Make sure you're not wasting it anywhere. Number 3, after you have maxed out your conservation, your understanding of the water system, sometimes in very limited circumstances, it does make sense to augment water. That means to bring in water from somewhere else, try to find a new source of water. The reason why these are prioritized is the ones at the top are preventative, scalable, resilient. They have tons of co-benefits. If you understand how the water system works and you learn to live with less, that never hurts you. If we end up in a wet period for a number of years, then all the better, right? We know how to live with less. On the other hand, if you're going to count on increasing water supply by taking some water from Idaho, for example, newsflash, Idaho doesn't have extra water. Neither does Colorado, neither does Nevada, neither does Montana, neither does Arizona, right? We've got to learn to live within our means. But you can end up in a really, really dangerous position there. So we've got to follow this recipe for water security, and the real focus is on water conservation. The good news is, because we have been very wasteful in the past, we can actually attain those numbers of a 30 to 50% decrease. Now, I was talking with a group of farmers a few months ago, and I showed them this slide because we're at a real crossroads. There is an easy way and a hard way. The easy way is that we come together, we compensate farmers for the conservation that they're doing. Those farmers participate in the water markets. They contribute to the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust that's gathering up all of this water. Everybody's doing their part. There's a harder way, where we deny that there's a problem. We blame one another. You got people in the cities saying, oh, it's just all about alfalfa. You got the alfalfa farmers saying it's all about the growth in the cities, right? And we continue to believe in these kind of silver bullet miracle cures. That's going to lead to federal intervention, and we're going to lose our ability to mount this rescue on our own. When I shared that story with the farmers, there was a lot of pushback. And one of the key points that they made was, this isn't actually an easy way and a hard way. This is a hard way and a harder way. And it's true. We are living at a time of unprecedented division, and we need artists and community leaders. We need political leaders from all across the political spectrum, right? From the far right to the far left to the extreme moderates, right? We need everybody to be working on this so that we can be the first community to demonstrate that it's possible to be good stewards of a saline lake. Now, I used to believe that everything started with policy, that if we could get the right policy in place, it would trickle down and solve all of the problems. This is a diagram from some of Terry Chapin's work. I now believe in an opposite model. This is about an awakening of our values. This is about a change in our vision, a broadening of the charity and love that we have for our home. That includes all of the humans in the watershed, also all of the other life that is here. Once our heart is opened to that view, good policy is inevitable. It will follow, right? Fast or slow, it will follow. And so what I'm focused on is, how can we bring about the cultural change at the speed that it's needed to mount this rescue? And I'm super inspired by Wangari Maathai, Nobel Prize winner who is a leader in ecological restoration globally. And I just want to read you this quote real quick. We are called to assist the earth, to heal her wounds, and in the process, heal our own. Indeed, to embrace the whole creation in all its diversity, beauty, and wonder. This will happen if we see the need to revive our sense of belonging to a larger family of life. And what I think Wangari Maathai is teaching us here is that we are in need of healing. Think about your family. Think about your community. Think about the individuals and the families and the communities that you know who are suffering. We are in need of this healing. And the way that we get it is working together to solve these problems. And so when I think about the eared grebe looking at us for leadership, I believe that Great Salt Lake is exactly the crisis that we need right now. It's an opportunity to set aside the tired divisions that have wounded our community for so long. And that is a labor not of science and data. This is only a challenge that we can accomplish through a shared consciousness, through love of one another, through a connection to our home. And that is what I hope and have faith and really believe our community is going to do. So thank you so much for your interest in Great Salt Lake. Thank you for your citizenship, your participation in our community. Let's do this. Let's be the first. Thank you.